Welcome, everyone. The past 18 months have been a period of unprecedented change in the way people work and the tools that they need to communicate and collaborate. Now is the time to look at longer-term strategies that support and enhance collaboration in a new era of hybrid work. Our guest today is widely published veteran industry analyst Zeus Kerravala. With a background in corporate IT and consulting, Zeus focuses on market transitions with communication and networking technologies. Hosting Zeus is Angus Norton, VP of Webex Product Marketing at Cisco. With that, I'll turn it over to Angus.
My name is Angus Norton. I'm the Vice President of Webex Product Marketing and Solutions here at Cisco. And today, I have the distinct honor of having Zeus Kerravala, who is the founder and principal analyst of ZK Research and has a ton of experience in the industry and the segments in which Webex offering is available. And thanks for joining us, Zeus. It's great to see you.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I'm really excited about this. In fact, I was so excited that I went out and got one of these new hyper quad microphones that looks like a lightsaber. So we'll see how this thing goes. But I am excited about this topic. It's it's great to see the evolution of Webex over the last year, and I'm thrilled to be talking about it.
Yeah, I noticed that mic, Zeus, and I follow you on YouTube, and I don't remember seeing that mic when you and Dave have been talking. So it's
no, this is the debut. It's the debut webinar for the mic. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a nice new addition. Well, great. It's great to have you here. So, Zeus, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do and the work you've been doing with customers and vendors.
Yeah, so I'm a market research analyst. I run my own firm. Unlike most analysts, though, I don't maintain a very strict coverage area. I cover most aspects of communications, networking, and security, but I really only look at the emerging technologies. And so the way I sort of liken it is, if the value from the analyst is how many widgets did you sell, then there's lots of box counting firms out there. I try and focus on those areas of disruption. In fact, it's been my thesis even back to my days when I was the chief research officer at Yankee Group, that it's moments of market transition that create market share opportunities. For instance, if Cisco back in the day had gone out and decided that they wanted to be in the voice space and built a PBX, similar to a Nortel or a Siemens, I don't think they would have had any success at all, because people had their favorite vendors, right? But they caught that transition to VoIP, and that's really what led them down to the path of where they are today, right? The acquisition of Webex was the same thing. So. And I've got a long history in this space. Actually, prior to being an analyst, so back in the late 90s, I was a very early adopter of Cisco voice over frame relay technology, actually. And if, for anybody out there with gray hairs and they remember the old MC3810 frame switch, we were trying to do voice over that, and then that became VoIP. And we were trying to do hoot and holler over IP at a financial services firm. And so it's been interesting that my career has grown up through this wave of collaboration.
Yeah, no, for sure. And ironically, you and I were talking earlier. This is my 28th year in the business myself. Actually, I was at Microsoft for 20 years, worked on Office 365 and a lot of products that most people can't spell anymore. And I'm surprised we never met each other. And I actually thought it would be a good opportunity maybe to start around the first question, just sort of talking a little bit about, how the market has been developing for some time. But, in the last 18 months, certainly from my point of view, we've seen dramatic sort of unprecedented change, not only in terms of the technology, which is already moving fast, but how society has changed in a way that we haven't seen those two come together really, probably ever even. And so I was curious what your perspective has been on this last 18 months.
Yeah, it's been sort of an interesting transition, because we look at a lot of the use of video on platforms like this is new, and it's new to business. But frankly, if you look at a lot of the consumer trends, I remember thinking about this a few years ago when I was on a plane and I was about to take off, and I was calling, someone to let them know I was taking off. But then the person beside me on FaceTime, right? And it's like the younger generation's always on FaceTime. They just never make calls. And I think what happened in the business world is, in fact, it was remarkable how many times I'd join a WebEx type of session and they'd use it to share slides, but yet you'd call into an audio bridge, right? And so there'd be no coming together of these mediums. But what the pandemic did was, when it forced everybody to work from home, then it caused us to rethink the way we work. And so these tools were ideally suited for it, right? And so if you wanted to get more 800 numbers set up for dial-in bridges, that would have been long and arduous, where these products had it built in. And frankly, the quality that you get over a product like Webex is much better than what you get with a dial-in bridge, because you have wideband audio and things like that. So this trend is here to stay too. In fact, one of my surveys that I ran recently, the pre-pandemic work from home number was about 22%. The post-pandemic permanent work from home number will be 42%. So that's almost a doubling. If you take just knowledge workers into account that are going to at least work part-time at home, that's going to be well over 90%. And so there's a reliance we've come on these online collaboration tools. These cloud-based tools are here to stay. We did see a sharp increase in spending early in the pandemic. I asked the question in a survey where did you increase spend? 55% of organizations said they increased their spending on collaboration tools. And now we're in this kind of new normal, if you want to call it that. Frankly, it's actually a constantly evolving normal, where we are in a hybrid work world. It's interesting. I listened to your CEO. He talks about wanting people in the office, X number of days a week. I listen to other ones. Mark Benioff is one that doesn't think he'll ever have people return to the office. And so there's no right answer to what hybrid work looks like. Every company is going to probably do it differently. I know some companies that are bringing people back in 3 days a week, some people 4 days a week, everyone's going to work at home. But the commonality is that we will be hybrid, and we will have to continue to rely on these tools to make us productive. And if you look at a lot of the data that's out there, it shows you that business leaders believe people have been more productive in this hybrid mode than in this work from home mode than they were in the office. And so there's mass adoption of integrated collaboration tools that brings together these things that were historically separate: voice, video, messaging, team collaboration. Is here to stay. Prior to the pandemic, only about 25% of meetings actually had video. That number is well over 80% now. And I think we've just gotten so used to video. And I always felt that, Angus, that if you talk to people about why they weren't using video, they had historical bias against it, that they were rolling in those old, room systems with big remotes, and it didn't work very well. And I thought if you tried it again, you would realize how much better the experience is. And that's the pandemic caused us to try it again. And now we're where we are today.
It's certainly been my experience. I've been at Webex for about 9 weeks, as you know, and I came from a different platform, a different company with different approaches to this. But sitting here on my GX Pro, with noise reduction, high quality video, a dedicated space to talk to someone, has truly been, for me, life changing. And as you think about sort of these changes yourself, and you touch a little bit on the social and workplace themes that you believe will be permanent going forward. So you're quite convicted that this isn't going to be sort of a blip on the radar. Humans forget about it and we go back to normal. You're pretty convicted about that, huh?
Yeah. I think it fits two really important fundamentals of business, and at least trying to attract workers and retain them. And one is work flexibility, right? We all want to be able to work when we want to work. It's interesting that work used to be a 9 to 5 thing, but frankly, at any moment of any day, you could be working or not working, right? And it's not uncommon for me to do calls late at night, early in the morning, but take the middle of the day off, right? So I think we've all become accustomed to trying to manage work around our life and vice versa. And the other one, frankly, is work-life balance. I think one of the things the pandemic brought us, it's a shame that it happened, but it did cause us to almost reset. People call it the Great Reset. We reset what was important. And there's a phrase that says that when you're in your deathbed, you never say, "I wish I had worked more." And so this, I think, really brought into focus how important work-life balance is. And so these collaboration tools have let us achieve that. And with that being said, I do think that we are looking for people to be more productive in shorter periods of time. I think one of the challenges we have is we work in this very kind of fragmented work mode where we're constantly being interrupted. I think a lot of the way we did collaboration in the past, where we use multiple tools, is we made the user the integration point for the data. So, you know what that's like. You get an email, you cut and paste it out, and you put it in this tool, you copy and paste that, you write down a phone number, that sort of thing. And so, I think all of those things lead to kind of a fragmented work model. And so there is a new mindset with business leaders, HR officers, employees, even customers, right? And we have to adapt to that. And so it's a big opportunity, I think, for employees and customers and employers to reset things and help people be more productive without burning them out.
That's true. And Zeus, I know that your company is sort of founded around this notion of strategy and tactics, right? In Japanese.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I think about what I'm reading a lot about today in terms of hybrid work, it seems that everyone's talking about hybrid work as a strategy. But the reality is actually implementing that, the tactics around making that real require a level of ingenuity, resilience, and it seems to me that in the sort of wave two, sort of deep in the pandemic, customers were sort of using whatever tools they could get up and running quickly. Maybe just focus on the tactics, less didn't really have time to think about the strategic part of the tools they were choosing. And
Yeah,
my
clearly.
sense is that there's kind of a silver lining, right? And that you may say the changes and many benefits are here to stay, but given that you are all about strategy and tactics, and now we kind of feel like we're moving into the tactical piece because customers are seeing that the strategy it's here to stay. What should businesses do now to sort of start creating that long-term, durable collaboration set of actions and tactics to make sure they're ahead of things?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think the initial wave of work from home was driven by panic.
Right.
It's like, we have 48 hours to get everybody work from home because we're going into lockdown. What should we do? And so companies just adopted everything. And now I'm getting the sense that the business leaders are taking a step back and they're trying to figure out what they should do long term and think about it more strategically. So that's the yin and the yang of tactical and strategy. And so I think there's a number of factors that should be considered. The first is you have to support a hybrid work model, right? And understand that mobile working is really the norm. And it's interesting that a lot of the platforms that in the space have pretty good desktop platforms, but they're not very good mobile. But frankly, from a user standpoint, you want to be able to have that experience be the same mobile or desktop. I think you want to ensure even stronger resilience and flexibility and security at times of crisis. Uh, I'm not fully convinced, Angus, that we're out of the woods yet with the pandemic. And so a lot of the businesses I work with, I tell them from an expectation standpoint, you have to be prepared for a world where everyone's in the office, no one's in the office, and every possible combination in between. Right. And so you're going to have these ebbs and flows where we're heavily reliant on them, we're less reliant on them. But that really underscores the importance of resiliency, right? And as a way to, because now if you're down, you can't work at all. The security aspect too, I think only comes up when there's a breach, right? And we're now doing things. I know, from being involved with some of the M&A work that Cisco's done, you've done entire acquisitions over Webex, right? So you think of the financial implications there, right? That if these systems are breached, right? So we can't really ignore security anymore, and I think at least it's more in the buyer's mindset. And then I think third, we need to focus on employee and user experience. I was speaking with one of the VPs of IT at Tesco a little while ago, and he was telling me that one of the fundamental premises they have for IT projects is that the solution has to be simpler than the original problem. And that's not always the case. I mean, you've worked in this industry a long time. The solutions we put in are often more complicated than this, the problem we're trying to solve. And so you need to think simplicity, you need to think user experience, and often in IT we don't do that very well. So in terms of strategy, I'd say one, move your collaboration functions to the cloud. That gives you the necessary scale, elasticity, and frankly security. I think this whole concept of this cloud's not secure went away a long time ago. Companies like yourself have far better security than 99% of companies out there, right? Second, get a complete and fully integrated suite. I think when you make the user the integration point for the technology, that's when you wind up in these more complicated scenarios. Three, and then map out and ensure support for complete integrated workflows. And so I think companies that evaluate these tools on a feature by feature basis don't fully understand the way people work, right? So think of workflows, think of how a knowledge worker works, how a field service person works, things like that, and then see how those tools map to the things to your workflows.
Yeah, it's you bring up workflows. One of the terms flown around a lot. I spent the last many years running engineering teams, and so I'm back in the other side of the fence now on product marketing. And I always used to joke that sort of AI was sort of the PowerPoint, and machine learning is Excel. People sort of throw the terms around a lot. It's AI this and it's AI that, and color me a little bit skeptical. But in my short time here, we got some. I'm going to put a plug in. I have to do that. Like we've got some pretty powerful AI capabilities that we've released over the last 6 months, and other sort of intelligent functions, which really, how do you see their role and importance for enterprise collaboration in that workflow area?
With AI, and specifically, I think AI will be the biggest change agent in collaboration that we've seen since the cloud. In fact, I believe AI almost mandates that you move to the cloud because the computational processes that are involved in doing some of these things is so high that doing it on-prem becomes next to impossible. With that being said, I think the way to think about AI is it's an assistive tool that can help you work better. And I've often likened it to, if you look at a lot of CEOs, they have a personal assistant that follows them around and hands them pieces of paper and reminds them of things. If everybody had that, I'm not so sure we'd need AI, right? But not everybody has that. So the AI can act as that person for you, where they can translate things in real time. They can remind you of who people are. They can provide you notes, right? I think they can help identify things, even from the standpoint of just facial recognition. Angus, I remember, back in the day when I was in an in-person meeting, I'd collect people's business cards and I'd lay them around the table in the order people sat in because I'd always forget their names, right? And so just having facial recognition on these systems can help with that alone, right? Now you take into all the other capabilities you have, some of the features that have been built lately, like being able to zip out noise, right? And I know a big issue for Cisco, from a company mission perspective, is to power an inclusive future. I think the AI capabilities do that. They let people that aren't technically savvy use some of the tools. For instance, the gesturing technology. We can translate now, so I think if we're going to get to that model where everybody is sort of equal, AI is the thing that's going to let us do that. And so now, whether you're in the office, out of the office, you're going to have a very similar experience. In fact, I think we're getting pretty close to a period of time when the remote experience is actually better than in office.
It's interesting. You say that. I think a lot about AI, not only in terms of the hybrid impact and making life better, whether you're inside the office or outside the office, but frankly, as the father of a 3-year-old, Zeus, I'm excited that by the time he's able to drive, humans won't be driving anymore because, frankly, humans aren't the best drivers in the world. There's just so much happening. I ride motorcycles, and I was taught that the human brain is only built to go at a speed of about a couple of miles an hour, if that. Like we're just not made for going fast. And so I think about it as applications very broadly. I think it's a great opportunity for customers. And so, if you don't mind, I think that was very instructive. It kind of sets up. You mentioned earlier suites being important, and my mind went to there's so many suites. And as you think about sort of the interest and momentum behind sort of meetings and collaboration tools, when I talk to customers, they tell me that it's just been developing so fast, and they have so much choice and so many options. And some of the choices seem obvious, but they're not totally sure, and they're not sure that really is the landscape. And so I'm curious, how do you see the landscape in terms of players and customers having so much choice in this new world?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because the term collaboration, right, is about as broad as there is in the IT industry, and really means everything. Any company that actually facilitates two people working together, right? But what I've noticed is that most of the key vendors in this space now have come at it from different directions, but they still have historical areas of strength. So you have an offering like from a Cisco that's got established capabilities in areas like calling, meetings, team collaboration. Yeah, you've had a rich set of devices for a long time. I think you've done a lot of work to make the experiences even richer and more integrated. Then you have companies like Microsoft. And Microsoft's an interesting collaboration vendor because they're really trying to leverage their Office suite more so than building a best of breed type of offering. In fact, a lot of what they have, even you think of like OneDrive and SharePoint, I would never say that those things are best of breed. If they were, companies like Box wouldn't exist, right? Um, but they're sort of good enough tools that surround the Office suite. But the Office suite's really the focal point there. Then there's a number of specialty vendors, companies like RingCentral that have historical strength in calling. Zoom's a very, very good video vendor. Then you have some contact center vendors that have tried to move into the collaboration space as well through acquisitions. And so it's a big mixed bag of offerings right now.
Yeah, yeah, right. And you mentioned sort of the ubiquitous suite of Office, and you mentioned the term collaboration, and I like the way you talked about it being the broadest term in the industry. I feel that way about that term for sure. I definitely feel about that term for AI. And so yeah, you got a lot to navigate there.
It is a
And
lot
you
to
know,
navigate.
yeah, a lot to navigate, right? And you have sort of firsthand experience as taking a look at that as part of your day job. And what are the highlights from your perspective? And maybe there's a few lowlights, but I'd be curious as to what you think the sort of the highlights are. If you're going to write a book on this period in history, what would you cite them as being?
Yeah, I think there's 6 key areas that buyers should be focused on. One of them is seamless collaboration for users inside but also outside the company. I think the initial wave of these products was really to allow internal workers to facilitate collaboration with other internal workers, which is why so many people bring in consumer tools or to
Sure.
facilitate conversations with people outside their organization. But let's face it, there isn't a role today most knowledge workers where you're not interfacing with people outside the organization, especially in this kind of post-pandemic world where doctors are talking to patients. These things are being used for teachers to educate students. Kids are learning, taking college classes online. Heck, the NFL draft was done over tools like this, right? So I think every organization conducts business with external participants, and connecting with those should be easy and secure, and that's really not the case with a lot of your competitors out there. Second, I think you do need to think about integrated hardware software. I know in this as an analyst, maybe I'm partially to blame. The when you read a lot in the public media and analyst reports that everything's moving to the cloud or everything's moving to software, right? The reality is that the best experiences are created when you have a combination of good hardware, software, cloud, and silicon, right? And so there's certain things that are best done in those. And I think in the consumer space, Apple's become the most valuable company in the world based off that premise, right? So, but I think collaboration now happens wherever you are, whatever device you have. The different types of rooms and spaces will dictate different types of devices. Although people still meet in conference room, they also participate from the road. They use external cameras. They use whiteboards. They start calls on their desk phone. They start calls on their mobile phone. They move them between the other. So you have to have that integrated experience. Otherwise, you're going to have a situation where users always defer to the easiest possible experience, right? And that you've worked with users for a long time. So if you give them a subpar experience in one area, they won't use those, and that winds up being wasted money. A third area, this flies under the radar, is enterprise calling. There are still a ton of workflows out there that are voice based, but yet we like to predict that voice is dead. Voice is far from dead, right? There's a lot. In fact, I remember talking with one company. They built a financial tool for millennials, and their contact center initially had no voice capabilities because they thought, well, millennials never use voice. But what they realize is that when people want to talk about money, they want to talk to somebody over the phone. They don't want to message, right? So calling is still very important, and that's an area that varies greatly from vendor to vendor. I think another emerging use case is the ability to embed in existing applications. If you look at the trends in this concept of the composable enterprise, it's based on a combination of bespoke applications with packaged applications. And so you have to be able to take these capabilities. In fact, Angus, it's my thesis that over time, the Webex type of interface that we see here becomes less important, but creating that Webex experience in other applications becomes more important. And so, but it'll always be a combination of the two. And that it's really important in certain verticals like healthcare, government, financial services, education, where you don't want people having to flip between applications and again being that that integration point. And lastly, I think, actually I got two more points. One is you want to have a single interface to manage and support users. We often overload our IT pros with difficult tasks, and what happens is if you don't have that single interface to manage and support users, you wind up with inconsistent policies. People have a different experience when they're at home or in an office or in a hotel, and that just creates, what happens is the user winds up suffering, which then reflects back on IT. And so that single source of truth is or place to manage from is critical from an IT perspective. And lastly, I think this is really pervasive across the tools. There has to be that focus on employee and customer experience. When it comes to collaboration, one size doesn't fit all, right? Although some of your competitors try to do that. And consider the scale of meetings, right? It can be just you and I like this. You can have 50 people, 250 people. I know Cisco does their all hands over these where you have 70,000 people sometimes, right? So not all meetings are the same, and I need different tools for different use cases. And especially when I'm dealing with customers, if they have a bad experience, they will probably go to a different provider.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. It's funny. You really took,
yeah.
No, you took me on a sort of a magical mystery tour of the last 30 years. And I remember when I started working myself, no one could send email outside the firewall. So you could send mail internally to each other. And I remember talking to my friends about it. This is 30 years ago. And they're like, what's email? And we have this. And then all of a sudden we could actually send mail externally. And you talked about, voice not going away. You could say the same about email, right? It's sort of the priority queue where most people start their day is in their inbox, right? There's a lot going on, and that's another rabbit hole, right?
I worked that environment too, where we had corporate email, we had loads of CC mail for internal email, and then our company told us go get an AOL account for external email, right? And so you wind up copying and pasting information to send it outside the organization or bring it back inside. So, and frankly, in the collab space, we've lived that for years, and I think it's really only now we're trying to fix that.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole nother webinar podcast on its own. I mean, that would be a really interesting topic to add to the list. So if you don't mind, let's turn to Webex quickly if we can. You've been on this journey with it, as you said, for a very long time, since the early days of Cisco, frankly, pre Webex actually. And so you've seen sort of a lot. And particularly over the last year, we've brought in new leadership. We've looked at the product left to right. Are there some highlights that sort of pop for you over the last 6 months, even?
Well, I think a lot of it has to, if I had to pick one, it's the advancement Cisco's made in AI. I think if there's a YouTube video I saw with the partnership that Webex now has with McLaren, and it shows just the variety of ways. The thing I like about it is it shows the variety of ways we collaborate. It had somebody on a racetrack trying to talk to somebody in a factory, right? And normally, heck, even when you're standing outside in your parking lot, sometimes there's so much background noise that it's hard to communicate, right? So it showed just exactly how diverse people can be in a single meeting, but yet their needs are all being met because of a lot of the AI capabilities. And so for me, from a highlight perspective, I think it's the role that the AI infusion in collaboration will be the biggest, game-changing technology that we've ever seen in this industry. And it's going to allow us to do things that we've frankly used these tools in ways we've never could have imagined.
Yeah, no, the McLaren one's a great one, and the McLaren one is a very personal one for me because I'm from New Zealand, and Bruce McLaren, as you may or may not know, was a Kiwi. So I
I did
tend
not
to
know.
be, yeah. So I'm a very loyal McLaren fan, not just because he's a Kiwi, but of course they're using Webex, and that's a great example for sure. So wow, so thank you for that. So all of us obviously are focused on functionality and user experience, and we know that you mentioned earlier the consumerization of IT, right? When we sort of folks are bringing in their phones and saying, "Hey, turn on my iPhone," and IT was sort of under this pressure to do that. And my sense is that there are sort of basic aspects of that user experience, whether it be enterprise or consumer, such as support and training and adoption, management, and then we don't talk enough about those things. Can you speak a little bit about that, especially if you're tasked with managing these disparate tools, and you're we have an extensive network of channel partners that are bringing value to the table as well. But what's your sense on these often not sort of less talked about elements of transitioning to hybrid work?
Yeah, well, I think your channel partners really play an important role there. I think that, frankly, Cisco doesn't have a big services organization itself, and it's never been Cisco's business model to do so. It sells most of its product to the channel, and the channel is the one that really helps drive that value down to the individual customer, and that's where a lot of the training and support and things like that come from. So, I think um, you know the focus needs to be on user experience and functionality, and but it does require support and training and customer success and things like that, because what I often see happen is that customers will buy a suite of stuff, right, and they don't use much of the stuff, and then the customer winds up feeling like they got ripped off. Now, part of it is that they may not even be aware that those features are there, and that's one of the fascinating things about collaboration in the cloud is you guys, companies like yourself drop in new features almost daily sometimes, right? And so how do customers know that those new features are there? How do they use them? And so what your channel partners are really good at with their customer success organizations is ensuring that those customers are aware that this feature's been added, this is how you use it. They can look at data and see that only 3% of the user population is using it. Maybe we need to do more training on the product. And so when the renewal comes around, the customer feels like that their needs were met, that they're fulfilled, they're getting full value from it. And the partner, obviously, then the renewal is easier for them. And so it's a nice sort of symbiotic relationship that if the partner does those things correctly, they have more success, and so does the customer. So it creates this win-win-win where Cisco, the partner, the customer all win.
Yeah, I like the way you talked about that. Yeah, so gone are the days of we'd work on a product for 3 years, and we'd burn a CD and send it to a million people, and then a new CD would come in 3 years' time, right? We're always shipping features every day, and
Yeah.
we obviously want our customers to understand the value there, and I think the way you talked about it makes total sense. So look, I'm going to leave some of the best stuff to last because we like surprises a little bit. Let's sort of, if you don't mind, sort of turn a little bit to some of the competitors out there.
Sure.
A big one for us is Microsoft Teams, and I was at Microsoft for 20 years, and so it's interesting being on this side of the fence and sort of understanding sort of what we have to offer, and I know they're a very worthy competitor, and we know that customers have choice. So I'd be curious to sort of hear from you, and if a customer is using maybe Teams today, or maybe they're on the E3 subscription, or maybe they're not. If they're invested in Microsoft, and they're not going to want to sort of de-invest in those areas. But do you think there's areas where we can supplement, where we can integrate with that investment they have in Microsoft? Some areas that you think come to mind the most?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say this about Microsoft, right? They're a great company. They are the office productivity leader. The Word, Excel, PowerPoint, products have become the de facto standard in the workplace. Although I can make an argument that the Google Suite maybe is a little bit better today. But with that being said, it's still the de facto standard. But in real-time communications and collaboration, not so much. They've really had some hiccups there. And this comes from the voice of users. When I ask users, oh, you're using Microsoft Teams, a lot of them will say, yeah, we don't really like it, but our IT department, makes us use it. And so the one thing Microsoft has done a very good job at is marketing to the IT pro, right, to their buyer. They haven't really been a great user experience company. And in a lot of those core areas that I highlighted, they do lack some capabilities. So, for instance, in the seamless collaboration for users inside and outside the enterprise, their guest company experience is really subpar. It creates silos as a guest, depending on who invites you and what permissions they have. That's going to change the guest experience you have. So you could have a guest experience with one company and another company have two totally different experiences, right? And so that's that creates a lot of from a customer perspective or partner perspective a lot of dissatisfaction. I think from an integrated hardware software perspective, I got into actually a Twitter argument with somebody at Microsoft about this, that I actually think Microsoft stifles innovation there. With Cisco builds their own devices, and so you can control that experience. Microsoft comes up with a reference design for their third party partners, but what they don't let their third party partners do what they do best. So, for instance, a Poly Teams room to me should be different than a Logitech team room, right? But they're exactly the same. And so but then Microsoft does that by dumbing down the devices, where Cisco, because you control that end-to-end experience, can actually create some very unique experiences. I think from a calling perspective, this may be the area where Microsoft is the weakest. Is it took them a long time to build calling in, and I think the fact that there are so many third parties out there that have direct routing offerings for Microsoft Teams, that alone will tell you that the Microsoft Teams calling isn't very good. Otherwise, there would be no market for direct calling, right? If it was good. And so, I think from a Microsoft perspective, the calling is kind of good enough if you aren't a very telephony heavy organization. But if you're a law firm, hospital, financial services firm, retail, anybody that does have a lot of calling workflows, I think they're fairly weak in. Another area where I think they've really struggled is, and this is shocking to me, is the ability to embed into existing applications. Microsoft is a company that's been lived and died by developers all its history. But with Teams, they only have one-way integration between MS Teams and certain apps. A lot of app developers complain about it. Some of their APIs aren't really all that open. They don't embed well into other business apps, including other Microsoft apps, right? And so this is an area where I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And then when it comes to like some specialized experiences, Microsoft, for example, just launched their webinar product, right? Cisco Webex has been doing webinars frankly for decades, and so they can't scale up to the hundreds of thousands that you would need for a live event. And so I think there's a lot of areas that that product still needs to mature. From a coexistence with Webex, I think if you're an E3 customer of Microsoft, which is a lot of, go ahead and use Teams for chat. It does a good job of that. But then bring in Cisco for calling, for webinars, for your large meetings, things like that. So the way I think about it is the basic functionality of collaboration, Microsoft does a pretty good job of, and I think they've really mastered that good enough experience. But when you have more sophisticated use cases, that's where you should bring in a third party like a WebEx to complement what you're already doing there, and that would actually give you a very good experience. I know Cisco's done a tremendous amount of work making sure it integrates well with Teams, and so that would give customers a almost like a best of breed experience.
That's great. And, Zeus, to be fair, I appreciate you sort of looking for the holes in maybe the Microsoft platform. But let's face it, no one's perfect. And I'm sure you've got plenty of advice for us as well. What advice do you have for us moving forward? And you've given a lot of advice to customers. You've given a lot of advice around other areas. But what are the things you'd like to see our team focused on?
Well, I would like to see Cisco continue to focus more on workflows, right, and get away from individual features. When I get briefed by our WebEx team, they're all very happy that I have this feature, this feature, this feature, and you can check all the boxes. But people don't work that way. You work in workflows, and I want you to help me be able to complete this task, faster than I could before. right? And so I think that's an area where Cisco could improve. Also, I don't think Cisco's done a very good job of explaining the value that integrated hardware, software, cloud, silicon experience. And if you use some consumer examples to help people understand, like what an Apple does, that might, that might set off a light bulb and say, oh, now I get it, right? Where, so many people defer the Apple way because, I can cut and paste something into my my clipboard on my Mac, and yet it shows up on my iPhone, right? And very similar with Cisco, but historically you've sold all those products, but I don't think really help people understand why it's important. And then I think Cisco could also be better in talking to in the language of the customer. So when you're talking to a healthcare professional, the way they work is different than where a financial services broker would work. And so if you're trying to articulate the value of how these collaboration tools would help, it would really be beneficial if your partners and your salespeople and even some of your your overlay folks were able to talk about it in terms that the buyer understands and brings that value.
I've made like 3 pages of notes.
Yeah.
I still like to use one of these. It's been those are like great notes. Actually, I think I'm gonna need to write an email on that topic to some people.
Yeah. Well, actually, if you use the transcription capabilities in Webex, you would have all the notes. So
call me old school. I have this wonderful ballpoint. It's actually a Japanese ballpoint, which I really love, and I really do like my Moleskine notebook. I've tried to use note-taking apps forever. It's just probably something I need to work on in my own workflow. I think Zeus.
Yeah.
So look, we've gone a lot of directions today, and I want to thank you. It's amazing how much you learn, and sort of opening your mind to that, both in terms of what we have to do, customers have to do, is always fun. But I suppose to wrap up, at the end of the day, we're all about customers. When I talk to customers, especially CIOs, it's been a heroic effort that they've gone through over the last year and a half, and sometimes it's an effort that doesn't get applauded too much. But we know that the pressure's not going to stop now. And so, what would be your top recommendations to enterprise customers who are looking to implement this sort of holistic, sort of long-term solution that you've alluded to throughout the last half an hour or so?
Yeah, I think the first thing is embrace the change that's happening in the world today, right? People inherently don't like change, but we are moving into a hybrid world. So map out your requirements carefully and consider both hybrid work and the profound change in workflows, right? As we've talked about, and that includes how it maps to pervasive use of video, chat, sharing, team collaboration spaces, things like that. It's an entirely different way of working, but once you get down into the weeds of it, it is making us more productive, and it is allowing us to work smarter. And remember that competitive advantage today is based on making the best decision, right, with the right people in as short a time as possible, and we need good collaboration tools to do that. And as I said before, and this is very important, move all your collaboration functions to the cloud. I think there's a lot of companies that are still die hard, on-prem. I want to control it, but this industry is moving so fast, right, that innovation in the cloud speed is orders of magnitude greater than what it can be on-prem. But pay special attention to calling, as it's likely based on-prem today, that will have to migrate to the cloud, right? But I do think the cloud plays a key role, and the more AI based that we become, the more important cloud becomes as well. I think also another recommendation, because choose a vendor that offers a complete and fully integrated collaboration suite. Do not make your user the integration point for the technology, right? That should be the cloud. And I also think one thing we didn't talk about is contact center, but cloud contact center should also be part of this. And I think a contact center almost is a specialty use case of these collaboration tools. And finally, don't overlook the basics, right? Security, availability of local installations, integration, technical support, deep expertise in networking and real-time communications. If you don't get the blocking and tackling right, none of the advanced stuff is going to work. But sometimes we're in such an effort, such a desire to use the cool stuff that we forget about the blocking and tackling. But if as with house design, if the foundation's not strong, the rest of the house won't be strong. And it's clear with collaboration, the foundational technologies need to be there.
Right. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Wow. man, I want to keep going, but like a lot of great discussions, that they always have to come to an end. Definitely some topics for a future discussion, I think, came out of today. And I want to thank you for your time. Really appreciate your perspective. And in fact, thank the audience for tuning in and listening today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zeus. Cheers.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Zeus, for being our guest and sharing your expertise. And thank you as well to all of you watching. To read Zeus's full report on collaboration, solution selections, and Webex, be sure to go to the URL on the screen, cs.co/durable hybrid work. Thank you so much for joining us.